And hello, we are doing an unusual episode today. We are not going to be covering any movies that didn't get made,
but instead naming just a whole bunch of movies that didn't.
Yeah! All right, it's going to be an overload of other movies that are not going to get made. Now, what we are going to be doing is we're going to cover two things. We're going to cover all of our listener emails, so any emails that were sent to us, we are going to read them on the air. And I know with a lot of these emails, there are also suggestions. And what we are going to do is, as we read through these emails, we are going to decide whether or not to actually include this on the list of movies that we need to explore. Now, I know that whenever I do any research about movies that don't get made, there are some things that we kind of gloss over because within the process, there's like 5 movies that have been pitched but never really seriously considered. So like I kind of consider something like J.J. Abrams' Superman trilogy, even though it was pitched, it was never really fully seriously considered. So that's why it's kind of falling under that weird category of like, is it part of a bigger story? So that's kind of how I approach a lot of these unmade movies and films and TV shows.
And I think we should also say for like the movies that we're considering for season 2, we haven't started work on season 2 yet. We're giving it a little bit more time, of course, but also any movies that are going on this list would be totally subject to change. I know in the process of doing season 1, there were movies that got added in the middle of things. There were movies that we took off of our list for, various reasons. So everything is subject to change, but this will be a fun little chance for us to read through some of your emails and celebrate the kind words that we've been getting for everybody, but also give us a chance to give you a little peek into our headspace as to what we're deciding.
All right, so let's go through email number 1. You may recognize who this is. So this email comes from Tracy Como from the Bare Naked ABCs.
Hello.
We had him on as a guest a few times, I believe, on the Weird Alphabet.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice to hear from him. Let's hear what he has to say. He says, "Great show. I love the idea, and you guys are doing an amazing job of not just researching, but also discussing an entertaining way. I have to say, I think the reason the British TV shows don't make the transition to America is they're British. I know, oversimplified. Let me explain. You can never do an Americanized Are You Being Served or Red Dwarf. Both were tried and failed miserably. Why? Because British comedians are inherently different. In trying to remove the British from British comedy, you remove what was funny about it for the audience that loved it. The outlandish situations, the irreverence, the dry, sarcastic wit, the bosses who are idiots and unlikable. Once these are removed, which American TV does, you end up with something that is completely different. You also mentioned Episodes does a great job in a British way of demonstrating this. An Americanized version of the It Crowd did get made and was hugely popular, but most people wouldn't say they were the same thing because they aren't. But it really is the Americanized version of these characters, The Big Bang Theory. Remove the buffoonish, unlikable boss, remove the dry wit, remove everything British. Now fill the void with American sensibilities. You have The Big Bang Theory. All right.
I agree and disagree. I think it's kind of oversimplifying things to say that The Big Bang Theory is the Americans' IT crowd. I think that's oversimplifying what the goal of both shows are. There's definitely a lot of similarities, but I think there is some things that are universal. Having an unlikable, buffoonish boss, I think, is pretty universal to a lot of different countries, not just the UK. And I'm sure not just the UK and the US as well. Like, I think there are some things that do transfer and there are some things that don't transfer. And I think the big takeaway for me for, doing that show is that it's really hard to define what does and doesn't transfer from one country and culture to another. And certainly a lot of producers do a pretty bad job at figuring out what does and doesn't apply.
It's the characters being nerds. And if you simplify it down to that, you can make the case for a lot of different movies and TV shows being similar to each other. But simply because the character is a nerd doesn't necessarily mean that it's directly derived of that.
It's like a totally different kind of lifestyle and career field that IT Crowd is a workplace comedy and The Big Bang Theory is friends hanging out in their apartment comedy.
Yeah. I don't know if I fully subscribe to that theory. I do like that comparison, though, of like, how would you make a nerd culture central television show and make it widely accepted? And that would be, yes, The Big Bang Theory. Whereas I don't know if with the IT Crowd, how well that was received in the UK. I don't know if it had that same acceptance as The Big Bang Theory. So,
I know it was pretty popular in the UK, but I don't know if it was the same like highest rated show on television level of popular.
I can see where you're coming from. I'm not going to fully agree with that one, but we're going to move on here. So Tracy Como, if you don't know, is the host of the Bare Naked ABCs, a podcast that goes through every single Bare Naked Lady song in alphabetical order. So in correct fashion, he did make a good suggestion. He said, I also wanted to reach out and offer you an idea. If you ever decide to discuss the Bare Naked Ladies variety show, of which only a pilot was ever made, I would love to join you. I was able to interview the director/producer of it and would be able to bring that with me. Or if you want to keep it to just you two, I could give you the interview and the pilot. Keep up the great work and look forward to having you guys on for 1 week. We're going to go be on for 1 week. Sincerely, Bare Naked Tracy.
Yes, thank you for writing in, Tracy. Going and offering yourself up as a guest for somebody else's podcast. This is the only way that you can do that. Most of the time, if you just reach out to somebody to say, hey, I'd like to be on your podcast, it's kind of tacky. But when you say, hey, I do an entire podcast already about this subject, and I've interviewed the director and producer and have a ton of inside information, I think I would be a really great addition to your podcast if you decide to cover it. Now, that is a way to say, hey, I'd like to be on this show. I know next to nothing about the Bare Naked Ladies, or certainly know nothing about their TV pilot, but that definitely sounds like a fun thing to talk about.
I mean, we know a little bit. I know that they did their Christmas shows, and those were variety shows, so I can understand a producer coming in and be like, well, if they can do that, then they can do this. And they were on another variety show, which we covered, the Weird Al Show.
Yes, of course.
So we'll move on from there. Tracy, we will get in contact with you about the Bare Naked Ladies variety show. Yes. This next email comes from Chad B. He says, hey guys, loving the podcast and can't wait to hear you discuss more films and projects that almost existed. I think a perfect candidate for an episode would be Batman Unchained / Batman Triumphant. Apparently the same project. Joel Schumacher's proposed follow-up to Batman Forever and everyone's favorite Batman and Robin. Keep up the great work.
All right. I'm not familiar with this.
So this was something that we actually did discuss in Batman. Like what I had mentioned before, if it is something that's kind of like a blip, like if someone proposes this movie, but it's not seriously taken, this is kind of one of those situations where it's part of a bigger story. And that bigger story was the Aronofsky Batman. On top of that, the other Batmans that were trying to get launched and eventually leading up to the Christopher Nolan Batman series. So for this, yes, this was interesting. And we actually did include this in our Batman episode, but it was not, unfortunately, one of those central focused stories, just because I don't think that was the bigger story.
There might not be enough there to warrant a whole episode.
No. But the Joel Schumacher proposing that he can make another Batman and make it more grounded and less campy like the ones he did before, I thought was an interesting take, especially because he thought he pretty much had it in the bag. And they're like, no, we saw what you did. We don't need any more of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that's a great suggestion. Next, we have this from Troy Johnson. It says, hey guys, really enjoying your podcast. please get a pop screen.
Was that in reference to me? I'm going to assume it was in reference to me.
I think we're both guilty of this, honestly.
Trying to remember if I was using my bad microphone for some of our episodes that we recorded?
I believe when we started, you were still using the Snowball.
And I hadn't yet gotten this nice microphone from Michael, so...
And we used to have pop screens for those Snowballs, but...
yeah, I still have those somewhere.
And I noticed myself, even though I don't have the pop... What is that, the foam that's on the actual microphone? What is that called?
I have no...
I don't know either. Wow, we were great at talking equipment. I have that all the time, but I did notice when we first started that I had this habit of being on the mic, like my lips would be touching the foam, and I realized that was causing a lot of issues and problems. The rule that I've learned was like keep about a fist length away from the microphone.
Yeah. Hopefully our audio quality has improved.
But thank you, Troy, for letting us know. Yes.
I'm glad that you enjoy the podcast, regardless of our audio failures.
Yeah. If you think that was bad, wait until you encounter the first few episodes of Weird Alphabet. So this comes from Eric from the Almost Famous Minute podcast. So he says, "Hey, fellow podcasters. Thoughts on doing an episode of Almost Famous where it wasn't going to be about Cameron/William as a young journalist, but instead a role for David Bowie as a band's publicist, roughly based on the Beatles' Derek Taylor." So it was a variation on Almost Famous with David Bowie.
I've never heard of this before, but that sounds really interesting.
Okay. So I'll put that in there and kind of look into what really entails behind this, because Almost Famous is not just a regular movie, like it's a well-known movie, but
oh yeah, it's a classic. But it is interesting that this is like, it's not a proposed sequel or a proposed prequel. It's a like, they almost made this version of the movie and then Witten made a totally different one instead. I don't think we've talked about anything like that yet.
No.
That's super interesting.
So we're kind of going into like the Almost Famous alternate universe. Interesting. Okay. I like that. So let's...
Yeah, we'll have to look into that and see if there's more to that story.
Mm-hmm. So this is from Rowan. Rowan?
Rowan. Roan. We're really great at pronouncing names.
We're so sorry. But you are at bootleg_Muppet on Twitter. Actually, that's pretty funny. And we're so sorry if we definitely mispronounced your name. We're so sorry. Anyway, they say, "Hello. I recently found your podcast via Escape from Walt Disney. Hey.
Hello.
And I love it so far.
Good.
I had a few different recommendations that I've always been fascinated about. American Dog, the pre-Lasseter version of Bolt by Sanders and DeBlois. That was looking too weird for Disney and led the two directors to leave Disney for DreamWorks. And Wildlife, the subversive CGI movie that was ultimately too edgy for Disney. Now, we have dealt a lot with things that are too edgy for Disney. So that's not like something that seems unusual or out of the ordinary. If something was edgy and Disney wanted to snag that up, now that's an unusual story. But I do like these. So we have American Dog, and we have Wildlife.
Now, I haven't heard of either of these movies, but in your one-sentence description there, it definitely sounds like there are stories to be told here. I would definitely look into this. This might be the type of thing that we might have to reach out to Tony again for.
So lastly, Bootleg Muppet had to say, "Thank you for reading and good luck with your podcast going forward. I look forward to seeing what you do in the future." Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I know Tony definitely helped get us some new listeners. I was really appreciative of him coming on the show. When he messaged me about wanting to do Roger Rabbit, and we put that together, he said that he had another movie idea that he'd be really interesting to come on for, and this is something totally different, but this is a movie that he was almost a part of, the Channel Awesome movie. Do you know about this?
I am unaware of this.
Do you know about Channel Awesome?
No, I don't.
Do you know about Nostalgia Critic?
Oh, I know Nostalgia Critic, yeah.
Okay, so Nostalgia Critic was building this whole Channel Awesome with all these other people, and that's where, like, Tony was part of Channel Awesome back in the day when that was a big thing. And Lindsay Ellis, I think, did stuff through with Channel Awesome. Jenny Nicholson, I think, as well. There's a lot of big YouTube personalities now who were a part of that. I am not familiar with that at all either. And so I am coming at this from an outside perspective as well, where I believe that the creator wasn't great to work with and stuff, and that channel kind of imploded on itself. A lot of the people who were a part of Channel Awesome do not have very good memories of being a part of that, and like there's a massive, fandom rift there as well. And the implosion of this Channel Awesome movie kind of coincides with the fall of Channel Awesome. And so Tony said he has a lot of interesting stories on that, and it would be something very different for us, but I think would still be something that I think would be interesting to talk about, because it is talking about a YouTube movie, a movie built around, not YouTube necessarily. I don't know if, yes, YouTube, but I think Nostalgia Critic even maybe predated YouTube, or at least like his popularity is beyond just YouTube, but that whole internet content creator, which is an era of filmmaking that I think is definitely something that is valid to talk about. So that's something else to put on there. It's a Channel Awesome movie.
There was one movie that was kind of about YouTube and internet content creators. It was like Smosh, the movie.
Oh, well, that came out. That was a thing.
That did come out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I did watch that movie, and I've never regretted watching a movie. Like at some points there are movies that have entertainment, but the whole movie felt like someone who had read about the internet and decided to write a movie about that.
I don't know if there's been a movie about internet culture and using like internet people that was good. There's certainly movie-length YouTube videos that I think are great. Jason Steele's Detective Heart of America, The Final Freedom.
Yeah.
There's stuff like that out there that is great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, Smosh definitely missed the ball. And their YouTube channel is far different from the actual movie.
Oh, yeah.
I did add the Channel Awesome movie to the list. Next, we have from Patrick Nicklaw. He says, "Hi there, David/Michael."
Michael!
Okay. You might have sent this to the wrong email. We'll find out. "I've just recently discovered your show, and I'm currently working my way through your backlog. After finishing your rundown of the fails spaced in IT Crowd US remakes, I was wondering if you were also aware of the equally baffling attempt of an Americanized Red Dwarf."
Yeah.
I know that Tracy Como brought that up, the Americanized Red Dwarf. "This show also not only reused several jokes, but also recasted Robert Llewellyn as the service droid Crichton. Do you have any plans to go over this as well? Regardless, I also wanted to say how much I enjoyed both of your in-depth and insightful research into these bizarre what-if shows and movies we never got to see. Love your work and hope to be gearing up for the two of you for years to come."
Yeah. So Red Dwarf, this is the second time we've gotten a Red Dwarf mention in our emails.
Well, that sells it right there. 2 mentions
I
of
have
Red
to
Dwarf.
admit, I don't know anything about Red Dwarf.
I don't know either. So I'm going to put that in there. That seems like something fun to explore.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for writing, Patrick, even if you did mix up Dan and Michael. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody was like, especially if you're listening to a new podcast and you're not familiar with the hosts yet, and so you go onto their website to try to find them there, and maybe with our half a dozen shows on the website, maybe you accidentally saw Michael's name instead of Dean's. So we don't hold it against you, Patrick.
No, I've listened to podcasts for years, and I don't remember the names of hosts that are part of those podcasts. Next, we have from Sam Aronow. He says, "Hi, fellows. I just discovered your podcast through Tony Goldmark. Hey, and I love it. And I have a suggestion with some caveats. Okay. Against All Enemies, the critically acclaimed script based on real events that have been highly anticipated for so long. Allegedly, it's been in pre-production since 2006. Jesus. That has arguably outlived the significance of the events it depicted." Okay.
I've never heard of this.
I'll definitely look into Against All Enemies.
Yeah, I've never heard of Against All Enemies.
So that's something that I will definitely look into, especially if it was in pre-production since 2006. So anything that's been in development hell for a significant amount of time is definitely something that I am for sure interested in.
I looked it up, and it's showing me a movie called Seberg that was a 2019 movie. Oh, I remember seeing trailers for this. It's starring Kristen Stewart. But what does it have to do with Against All Enemies? Because this is talking about a French New Wave icon, Jean Seberg, in the late 60s. Hoover's FBI targeted her because of her political and romantic involvement with civil rights activist Hakeem Jamal. I don't know if that's the same thing. I don't know why that comes up when I do a search for Against All Enemies. Maybe that was like an alternate title that it had.
I mean, that's why we do the research, to find out.
That's true. That's true.
What's the through line? How do we get there?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's something I will be looking into. I like that idea.
Oh, it looks like it was originally titled Against All Enemies, but I don't know what that has to do with 2006 and why. That's interesting. I don't know. We'll have to look more into that. Thank you for the suggestion, Sam.
Yeah, thank you. All right, next we have, this one's called Fan Mail.
Hey, I like fan mail.
This is from Jonathan Wixon. He says, "Hi," with 2 exclamation marks, I should add. "I just binged about 5 episodes of your podcast on a recent road trip, and I really enjoyed it." Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. "Felt like you were in the car with me.
Aww.
But were really rude and didn't respond to me when I responded." That seems like me. Seems like par for the course for Dan, though. "Whenever I drive him to things, he seems to fall asleep." Okay. Anyways, so just so you know, Johnny's actually a pretty good friend of mine.
Oh.
Anyways, had a couple of thoughts while driving and also just in general. 1, Dan needs to sound a lot sexier when he intros the movie. Don't care how you do it. It needs to happen. Noted. With Richard Williams and H.R. Giger, they were definitely on another plane of existence. Would be interesting to learn a bit more about what influences or what they were on that opened their mind to these vivid visuals.
I don't want to speculate on if there were any specific substances that opened somebody's mind to specific visuals. We're recording this right after we recorded our Halloween episode on Ed Wood's I Woke Up Early the Day I Died, which at the time of listeners listening to this, that episode has already been out. At the end, we kind of talk about the very thin line between being a terrible filmmaker and being a genius filmmaker. And I feel like Richard Williams and H.R. Giger are 2 people who do walk that line, that kind of mad line of like, Richard Williams is like a step away from being terrible.
They're great at what they specifically do. If it's animation, Richard Williams is a genius. If it's story, then he's kind of out there. Yeah. Another point here. Have you ever thought of putting together recommended movies for each podcast or in general? I'm always down to watch a couple of movies or something to get more enjoyment out of the podcast, or just to know what each of your top 10 films are and why.
So the first podcast I ever tried to make, which is no longer online, This Is Not a Film, that was something that we did every episode is the 3 of us on the podcast, so myself, my co-host Heather, and then whoever our guest was, we would always recommend a film that was tied to the movie we were discussing or even maybe just something we saw recently. The only rule is that it couldn't be something that has ever been recommended on the podcast at any other time. The idea being that, when we've done the show for a while, we'll have this massive list of recommendations with no repeats. That was a fun thing to do. And that also kind of reminds me of when we would do the same sort of thing for Thank You Internet. We would always recommend a YouTube video of the week.
Oh, yeah. I forgot you did that.
Yeah. That could be a fun thing to end episodes recommending a movie similar to what we were talking about. I think just about everything we've talked about, there is another movie either that we're talking about a proposed sequel, and so the recommendation would be to watch the original.
I've been putting up things on our Twitter, things in reference to, like, for example, The Thief and the Cobbler, the entire uncobbled cut is on YouTube, so I would link that. Or when we did Roger Rabbit, I linked the videos to the screen test, to the Fanta commercials. It's kind of hard to do like movie recommendations. And there are definitely like, while we're telling these stories, to be like, and they also made this movie, which is great. You should go out and watch it. Because of the subject that we're covering, it goes beyond that.
It's tough to make it a regular segment. But you know what? I can recommend a movie for you right now. I'll recommend the movie that I always talk about, which is my favorite movie that I have a tattoo of. But go watch It's Such a Beautiful Day, the film by Don Hertzfeldt. As of this recording, part 3 of his World of Tomorrow series, I think, is coming out in a couple of days. I know I've talked about this before. Have you ever seen It's Such a Beautiful Day, Dan?
I have, yes.
I love that movie.
Go
watch It's Such a Beautiful Day.
Mm-hmm. I can go into maybe like weird things that I've discovered through there. So like I will oftentimes do deep dives into things that are not related. So one thing that I left out of the Batman episode was a history of Spring-Heeled Jack. That guy was a guy who terrorized parts of Great Britain, and he dressed up like a bat, like a demon. He had like these beady red eyes. He had like claws, and he would terrorize women with those metal claws. And then he had something in his shoes to like help him jump really high up and escape from police custody. But there was suspicion that he was the Duke of that area. So this philanthropist who had a lot of money go out in the middle of the night, dressed up as a bat, terrorizing women. This seems like it was a inspiration for a movie like The Shadow of the Bat, which then was an inspiration to Batman. But it's just so far removed, but that's something that I recommend looking into just because that's such a fascinating story.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I don't have like movie suggestions, but I can send you down your own rabbit hole if you want.
Just speaking of movie suggestions, like when I first moved to LA and had no friends and all I would do in my free time was just watch movies constantly, I could watch like 2 or 3 movies a day just in my free time. I remember there was a weekend where Criterion Collection on Hulu was free, and in the 3 days that it was free, I watched 20 movies in one weekend. But I haven't like had that crazy binge of watching movies recently. I've always wanted to watch through the 1001 Movies to See Before You Die book. At this time where I was going through a bunch of movies, I would just like pick random ones on there that I could find on Netflix or whatever streaming service I had. I've been thinking a lot about going through that book and trying to watch all of the movies in release order. It's probably a terrible idea and will take far too long. It's not something that I would make a podcast about or anything because I feel like I wouldn't have anything to say on most of those movies, but a just for me thing. Maybe report back in on like our Patreon Unclogged show or something.
There's a Paul Scheer podcast that's out there on top of him doing How Did This Get Made. He's also doing Unspooled with Amy Nicholson, who is a LA-based movie critic. And they just recently finished their reviews of the top 100 AFI movies according to the list in 2007. And they have a really interesting discussion about, is this movie really something that deserves to be on the list? Why is it on the list? Why does it belong there? If this is representing a director who has been on there more than one time, is there one singular movie that can really represent that artist?
And why in the world does the AFI list have like 3 Buster Keaton movies and no Charlie Chaplin movies? Yeah. Come on, AFI.
So there's a lot of problematic things that is brought up. And then what they're doing right now is that they are going beyond the AFI list and they're exploring movies that they believe should be considered for the AFI list, and considering that since AFI is only for American films, they're trying to also introduce international films into this list of greatest movies of all times. And I think that's an interesting discussion to have. And they've gone further in depth into this whole list. And I think that's something that I would recommend looking into if you're looking for great films to watch.
For sure.
And then lastly, from Jonathan, he said, I would like to request you to do an episode on District 9. I enjoyed it, and it was set up perfectly for a sequel. And I've been left waiting 11 years. Not fair. Yeah, we got Chappie, but I'm still not sure if that's what that was.
Was there plans to do a sequel? I mean, I get that it's kind of set up for one, but I don't know if there were plans for one. There is a different story there, though, that I know we can make an episode of, which is the Halo movie. Are you familiar with this?
I heard of a Halo movie in pre-production.
So I don't know how true this is. This is like things I've, heard through the fandom grapevine. But so the story I've heard is that Peter Jackson, after the success of Lord of the Rings and everything, was hired to produce a Halo movie and hired Neil Blomkamp to direct that movie, and they were working on it together. But then that production didn't end up coming through, so they made District 9 instead. And supposedly there were assets, like 3D assets that were developed for the Halo movie that were reused, like mech suits being reused in District 9 that were originally designed with the intention of being used in this Halo movie. I'm saying that from memory from just hearing other people on fan stuff report on that. I don't know how much validity there is to those stories, but that is definitely, if you want to mark down Halo movie / District 9, I'm sure those stories kind of tie together.
Yeah. So from what I'm seeing here is that for the sequel for District 9, it just seems like Neil Blomkamp is wanting to make a sequel, but has just not been approved to do so. But there doesn't seem to be
progress made on it.
So this might just be a blip in history, but I think that's something that we can definitely tie in with the Halo movie for sure. So I think that's the bigger story there. So we'll look into that and we'll see that, and maybe we'll have a good discussion about Chappie.
Thank you for reminding me about that, though, Jonathan, because the Halo movie, there's definitely a story there.
Yes. So we'll definitely explain and go into that. I like that suggestion.
Like, I feel like that story happened again where somebody tried to make a Halo movie and then it didn't end up happening, and then the assets were used for, like, I want to say Oblivion, the Tom Cruise movie, that originally started as a Halo movie as well.
I can see that.
I don't know. I could be totally off base, but I know I've heard lots of stories of people almost making a Halo movie and it not happening, and then the people who were supposed to make it do something different instead.
And this last email actually comes from my dad. And this email is titled A Clean Garage. And he said, listening to your podcast also helped get the garage clean. And then he included a picture of it. Yep. And it has Willow. My sister recently got a puppy named Willow. And you can actually see there's our Datsun 280Z. I'll have to include a picture of this up on our Twitter and Instagram later on so you guys can see it. But yes, hopefully many of our other listeners are taking the opportunity to listen to us while doing chores.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for writing in. We definitely have lots of great ideas for future Season 2 episodes.
Yeah. Now, before we sign off, though,
yes,
I like to do about 12 movies per season. And with that, we got 8 ideas out of that. We still need about 4 more ideas. Now, I have 2 movies that I'm proposing that I think are going to be big hitters. I want to cover the Jurassic Park 4 movie, and the script is out there, and it's actually pretty interesting to read through because with Jurassic Park 4, you definitely see elements that were used in that script being used now, currently in Jurassic World. More specifically, Fallen Kingdom. You see a lot of elements taken from Jurassic Park 4 and put into that. And I think this will help us better understand as to where Jurassic World is going now. The other one that I want to go into, just because I love my superheroes, we are going to go into George Miller's Justice League and his take on the Justice League. Is it going to be in any way similar to Fury Road?
Yeah. And then I know we've talked about, was it on this podcast that we mentioned Star Wars Detours and wanting to do, or was that on
I think that was Weird Alphabet and our Patreon episode.
Oh, okay. Yes, Star Wars Detours is definitely something I would want to talk about. Oh, it was on Tony's show. When we were on Tony's show for his 27th episode, we mentioned Star Wars Detours and went into that a little bit. That is definitely something I would love to talk about. I know me and you have also talked about Star Wars Underworld, the Star Wars live-action TV show that was being developed before the Disney buyout right alongside Detours. One or both of those shows could be something that we could talk about in Season 2.
It looks like we got a pretty significant list, and I'm enjoying this lineup for Season 2. This will be great.
Maybe we could save some things for Season 3. Maybe 2 Star Wars TV shows is too much.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody again for listening.
Yeah, thank you.
You should have listened to our other episodes before listening to this. I don't know why you would listen to this and having not listened to anything else.
Thank you for everyone who did write in. I know that we didn't really respond to much of the emails. I think I only responded to one, but I was holding off on responding to those emails just because I wanted to kind of make this a discussion. And I want you guys to know that, yes, you are actually influencing the direction of where this show is going. So thank you all for those suggestions.
Yes, absolutely. And again, that email address is notgetmade@gmail.com. Find our website, pipedreampodcast.com. And anybody who's taking the time to listen to an email show instead of an actual episode might be somebody who's willing to help pay for the show and help make sure that we can pay for feeds and pay for web hosting, be able to have the time and resources to continue to make these shows better and better. So you can find our Patreon page at our website, pipedreampodcast.com. And that is a Patreon for all of our shows on our little network. $2 a month, you get an extra monthly bonus show, and for $5 a month, you get access to notes and unproduced podcast pilots and other things. So go find all of that at pipedreampodcasts.com. Thank you again, everybody, for listening.
Thank you.